Welcome to another episode of Consensus Unreality. Before we get to this next great interview, we want to invite you to join us over on patreon.com/consensusunreality, where we've got all kinds of bonus episodes. That's where we get the bulk of our sort of off the cuff and research episodes out to you. And we have a new merch store.
We also host our full archive over there of all of our past episodes, regularly releasing exclusive episodes, written content. We also host a private Discord server, so check all that out at patreon.com/consensusunreality for just $5 a month. The price of a cup of coffee these days, Ben.
That's it's the price of a decent cup of coffee.
Okay. There you go, folks. And we also just dropped our merch store as well. Got some great items on there. Shirts, hats, coffee mugs. So check that out. We're really excited about it. consensus-unreality.printify.me. Thanks for listening, as always, and enjoy the interview.
Welcome to another episode of Consensus Unreality. We're joined today by Shannon Taggart, the artist behind the book Séance, which is a really beautiful book of photography of the current sort of culture behind spiritualism and communication with the other world. There's some really striking stuff in here, and we're very happy to have her on. So thanks for joining us, Shannon.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, we're both super excited. It's really awesome because I feel like your work is quite close to us. Been interested in media my entire life and the kind of like spectral artifacts that you can capture with different forms of media. But I also feel like what you're doing is kind of like a stewardship of the history of spiritualism with your work. Do you kind of feel that way as well?
Yeah, definitely. In fact, I never intended to become, I'm sort of like a outsider anthropologist, self-taught, and a connoisseur of all things paranormal. And then I sort of became a writer because the project required that, because a lot of it deals with this lost history. Like a lot of this stuff has been written out of history books and wasn't recently, or wasn't relooked at until recently. And, I was in college, I was studying photography in the 90s. And that's when nothing about spiritualism and media and that kind of image history was in anything that, I studied from. The first book I found was this book called Beyond Light and Shadow by Rolf Krauss. And it was a German book. I think it was published in 93 originally in German and then translated into English in like 96 or 97, somewhere around there. And I think I graduated college in like 98. So, it was like really new. It had been like, it was like embarrassing history, it was like, what do you call it? Rejected knowledge,
Yeah. I wanted to ask, what, like in your studies of all this, what is like the relationship between the technology of photography and spiritualism? Because they seem to come about sort of in a similar era.
Yeah, I think 1837, I always screwed up, 1837 or 1838 for photography, and spiritualism is, I think it's 1837. And then spiritualism is 1848. And then, and I studied photography in Rochester, New York. And I made the realization during the project that, Kodak, where Kodak is in Rochester, that's where photography was kind of like popularized and brought to the masses. Not till the 1880s, but still it was the Kodak Tower is on the exact same street where the first public seances in America happened, like the Fox sisters, and I think that was like 1849. So it's just like there's all these connections, and I think photography, you know, in and of itself is a form of spirit photography, right? Because like you're trapping time, and every photograph is eventually going to be, I mean, the minute you take it, it's a spirit photograph technically, right? But like, you know, any picture of a person is eventually going to be, you know, some record of their passing, you know? So I tried to get to unpack a lot of that metaphysical stuff. And, you know, I worked as a professional photographer, and a lot of photographers don't like to think about that aspect. And I don't think we think about the photography in the same way now that everybody has them in the phones and all that, you know. I don't know.
Yeah. Like that old like superstition about it like taking part of your soul or something. If that's true, there's not a lot of souls left right now. Yeah.
Yeah, that relationship is insane. I did not know that about Kodak, but yeah, the proximity is really crazy, because it seems like within spiritualism, a lot of it is about the documentation, right? And kind of that there seems to be the technology is like embedded in the practice almost, right?
Yeah, definitely. Like a lot of people would say, you know, it's inappropriate to photograph ritual, for example. Like if there was a magic ritual or something, it would be kind of weird. But spiritualists have always like welcomed cameras and technology. Like it was part of everything. Was the whole seance was conducted in the spirit of a scientific experiment, kind of, meaning like it wasn't hidden, it was public, or at least like nothing they were doing was being hidden. You know, where you get into esoteric practice, that a lot of that stuff is secret. There's secret initiations. You can't know what went on. So spiritualism just is in the spirit of scientific discovery. And everything that's done is, even if you make a photograph, it's kind of meant to serve as proof as well as an image, or, you know, even, you know, when mediums do spirit art, it's not just supposed to be art, it's supposed to be proof, like testimony of the spirit world, or like some sort of like media that proves. And they were really trying to merge science and religion. And like photography is a weird thing because it kind of merges science and art. You know, there's a lot of I don't know, there's a lot of crisscrossing going on.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It's an interesting point, because it reminds me of like with the OTO and stuff, the publication of the rituals was such a big stink when it happened. But I know in your book you say spiritualism is a rebellion against death. So it seems like as much of it has to be put out there as possible to get everybody on board with that, right?
Yes. Yeah. They and almost everything in spiritualism, like a lot of people conflate it with occult practice or paganism. And, you know, technically, I don't think I think there is a solid argument that it is that, but spiritualists argue against that. They see themselves as rationalists, like this is natural law, like, you know, and they're not trying to do a magic working to like enact their will on the world. Like everything that they do is just to prove that we live on, like make the connection and prove that it exists, to like free us from this idea of death, like free us from believing that we die. And they're very much tied to the idea that the personality lives on after death. Although spiritualists are not supposed to believe in reincarnation. That's the difference between spiritism and spiritualism. Like, so spiritism is kind of, spiritualism goes to France, and Allan Kardec writes a text, and one of his arguments is that, you know, reincarnation is a reality. And so my spiritualist friends always say like, oh, well, with reincarnation, we're kind of like the Catholics. you're not supposed to do it. You're not supposed to believe, but the Catholics with birth control, like Catholics aren't supposed to go on birth control, but they do. Spiritualists aren't supposed to believe in reincarnation, but a lot of them do. It just depends on the spiritualist.
Yeah, I feel like that's kind of what makes your work so important too. Is we talked a little bit about that history, and I feel like it's so important to the Western world and our development in our spirituality, especially as Americans too. I mean, it's not specifically an American tradition, right? But it kind of
it is.
Oh, it is. Okay. Yeah.
It was, I like to say okay, so the word séance, it's a French word, right? And it means like circle. And we have this idea of these Victorian England séances, but the séance is an American invention. Like it's full on American new religion. So yeah, upstate New York, it started in upstate New York, and that's actually where I'm from. So, but that history is not really talked about. I mean, I grew up there and we never learned about this. And it wasn't just spiritualism. It was the Mormonism started like within this 20-mile radius, Mormonism. The Shakers had a presence there. I mean, they didn't start there, but they ended up with a huge community there. The Seventh-day Adventists who became Jehovah's Witness, and then the Oneida, and there was like 30 different kind of religious movements and sects and yeah.
Oh, yeah. Is that what they call the burned over district?
Yeah. You guys are in Pennsylvania, right?
Yeah.
Okay. What part?
Well, I'm in like the Lehigh Valley, so eastern, and Dave's in Philly, so both eastern Pennsylvania.
Okay. Yeah. Lilydale, where I did my pictures, it's not far from Erie. Like it's like an hour.
Right.
Hour from Erie.
Yeah, I've been meaning to get up there to just, have a look for a little while now. Is it, that's where this project kind of started, right?
Yeah, that's where it started, in Lilydale. Because I grew up in Buffalo. And so Lilydale's like about an hour away. But every summer I host a symposium there.
Awesome.
So I try to get people like you who like always needed a reason to get out there, to get up there.
Yeah, that sounds incredible. I was checking it out on the map yesterday. It looks like an incredible region. I love going out to the Midwest and stuff like Ohio and seeing all the native mounds and stuff. And it's north of there, but out by Cleveland. It's pretty close to Cleveland, right? Yeah,
it's like, I don't know how many hours it is from Cleveland. I think maybe 2 hours from Cleveland. Yeah.
So
probably about 2.
Okay. Do you want to talk about the history of Lilydale a little bit?
So it's interesting because Lilydale the spiritualism started with these Fox sisters, these young girls who said they were in contact with the spirit of a murdered man buried beneath their home. And, the house that they were in, it wasn't just them it was a haunted house. I mean, it was a purportedly haunted house. Like the previous 2 or 3 families had also experienced haunting. And so on March 31st, 1848, for whatever reason, they decided the story goes, although some historians have unearthed new evidence that actually the adults were doing the knocking first. But the legend goes that the young girls started the knocking with like doing letter code and yes and no. And it drew like a crowd of like a few hundred people, and it became like this big event. And then spiritualism just like exploded as a movement. And Rochester, New York was like a hotbed for abolitionists and like free thinkers and progressives, and the women's rights movement too was happening. So spiritualism just kind of like grew into this progressive movement. And then women started using it as a way to it wasn't technically illegal for women to speak in public, but it was dangerous. Women were not supposed to speak in public. And so if they spoke in trance, it was more acceptable somehow. So they kind of like used the spirit world to like flip the script. And then there started all these like trance speakers, and Lilydale it had started as a community, like before there was mesmeric healers, like people who were practicing mesmerism in the 1840s, and they were there. And then the spiritualists and the mesmerists started like meeting up there, and it turned into a camp, and it kind of became like the who's who of this progressive movement. Like Susan B. Anthony used to hang out there, and like, a lot of high level suffragettes or free thinkers. And it was kind of like started like a cottage town, like with tents and stuff. And then gradually somebody donated the land, and they started building these Victorian cottages. And like now, if you go to Lilydale, it really is a lot of those cottages that were first built are like what people stay in. And not a lot of people live there full year round. It's more like a summer thing, but it really is like being in a time warp, because it's like you couldn't build that town now because of code and stuff, like, so it's really, there really is something like a really big feeling of time travel when you go.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's really interesting. I guess this kind of brings up an aspect I wanted to ask you about. We talk, at least on this show, a lot about like how hoaxing kind of like braids itself around like true experiences, and like the way they kind of feed back into each other. What kind of like was your experience of that in your research or in your own sort of documentation? Like, did that kind of play a role?
Yes, for sure. And that, I mean, to me, that issue is like the issue, right? Like it's the thing that stops people dead in their tracks with this stuff. And it's also like, I couldn't get on board. Like, I started approaching the project in 2001 in like a very innocent way, where it's like, is this real or is this not, and then and then I got so wrapped up in like, oh my God, this cultural history, like this is crazy, because wherever you find 19th century innovation, you also find spiritualism. And like, today it's kind of branded as like, oh, it's like, it's intellectually suspect, or kind of like woo woo, I mean, like people who are non-discerning those are the only people interested. And that's not the case. Like they're the biggest brainiacs in the world were like totally into this stuff. And so the fraud thing though, like, so I was kind of approaching it like, is it true or is it false? And then, especially with all like the dark room seance stuff and those pictures, like pictures of Victorian seances and ectoplasm, which is the substance that emerges from the medium's body, and it looks like gauze or cheesecloth or whatever. Those pictures, they're so silly, but they're so absurd, but they're so powerful.
Yeah.
And I just had to like decode them. And then in order to really study spiritualism, you have to learn about stage magic, and you have to read about parapsychology. And like, I kind of got to a point, I worked on the project for like 4 or 5 years. And then I was just like, I can't do a project about this. How can you, like, this is too much to decode. And like, I'll never, how do you photograph invisible things? Like, how do you talk about, like, how do you accept that some things can be faked and some things like, but there's still a reality? Like I couldn't get there. And so I just stopped. But I read a lot. Like, so for like 3 or 4 or 5 years, I just read, because I couldn't stop thinking about it. And then, I came to the fraud issue kind of in a sense of, okay, so there's a lot of different avenues, like people looking at fraud in different ways. But I came to the realization that our culture has a different idea of true and false than like ancient cultures. And that something ancient was going on. It was like a reemergence of something ancient, and that fraud played a more complicated part than, oh, it's just this medium just is a fraud and everybody else is real. Like that's not, it's kind of like that Phil Ford on Weird Studies, he described fraud once as like the bacillum that you need, like the mold to make cheese.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
that's
I
great.
loved that
Yeah.
analogy. I thought it was so brilliant. Like, because it's almost like it's the stinky stuff you don't want to think about, but like somehow is embedded and is necessary. So you know what I mean? Like, so there's a lot of different theories about what role fraud or hoaxing does play. Some have framed it like there's a British parapsychologist. He's deceased now, but his name is Kenneth Batcheldor, and he had this idea that, you know, if you fake something, like if you're in a group setting and somebody fakes, it may be to like an artifact induction, like
Yeah.
it relieves anybody of the pressure of thinking that they're actually the cause, and then it relaxes the situation and allows the real thing to like come, kind of like priming a pump or something.
Yeah.
And like he had one technique where like sitters, like somebody would get a card, and if you got the card, you would have to like fake, like throw the table up when nobody was looking. But nobody knew who had the card. And so like that small, like little dose of fraud could invoke like a whole, like genuine, sincere experience.
That's so interesting. That's kind of like an invocation or something. Like,
yeah. Yes. And like, this is my thing, because I don't want to conflate everything with I try to be careful about like saying, oh, this is like that, but you do see a lot with psi, things being renamed and reshaped, or even in parapsychology, I think they're doing straight up magic, but they're not like, you know, they're not seeing it that way. Or, you know, I mean, Dean Radin, I don't know if you saw that book, Real Magic, where he kind of like comes to that realization, like, how is this similar? How is this different? Like, but you know, and then there's like a Carl Jung quote about fraud, and he says, I don't remember the exact quote, but it basically is like, fraud may be the necessary end to a period of strong psychic phenomena in order to like restore consensus reality, because consensus reality always is restored in the end, or like it forces itself. Like you can take a situation out of consensus reality, but you can't keep it there, you know?
Yeah. That's it. I mean, with the Fox sisters too, right? It started with a genuine experience of phenomena, and then the concepts of hoaxing were accused afterwards, right? Like it's supposed to have started as genuine.
Yes. I mean, there were like, you know, and they were doing so many seances and stuff, but they were producing very compelling phenomena. And then also the Catholics were really strongly against spiritualism. And there was a time in the country where it looked like spiritualism maybe become like overtake Christianity. It was like that popular. And so, and the girls became alcoholics, and that's also a common thing in mediumship. I mean, I think it's a hazard for creatives in general, right? Like, but they became alcoholics, and then supposedly a Catholic priest paid them to like confess how they did everything, and they got on stage and said they were using their toe knuckles to make the knocks, and then they recanted. And then on the deathbed of one of them, like there was somebody witnessed they heard knocks all through the room, like as she was dying. You know, that's like every spiritualist story is like, oh, but wait, but wait, like no, but yes, but no. And though I interviewed one of this very controversial medium named Kai Mugi. He's like the head ectoplasm guy of the world right now. but I interviewed him, like, what do you think? Because in spiritualism, they accept that there's a concept called mixed mediumship, where it's like you could be a real medium, but sometimes because of social pressure or financial pressure, you like fake it when the power isn't there. And he said, yeah, like scientists fake data all the time, and like nobody has that big of a deal. Like nobody, like, why are mediums held to like such a higher ethical standard than people in other professions who often fudge things? And I actually think it's a good point.
Yeah.
Like,
Definitely. I think it's funny you mentioned Jung too, because I have in my notes here a quote that really stuck out to me in your book was taking your imagination seriously. And that reminded me of Jung's process of active imagination, which he used in some things, but specifically the Red Book as a means of like bridging the gap between the conscious ego and the unconscious mind. Was that something that you kind of thought about in your work too, or your documentation?
Yeah. And I mean, like the Red Book, I mean, what is that? Like, is that mediumship? That's straight up magic? Like, I mean, it's wild. So yeah, I think like when you take a mediumship class, like there's a lot of similarities between what a Jungian therapist might walk you through in an active imagination. Like there's a lot of correspondence, and it's just like letting your imagination go and trusting what is coming in, and not saying like, oh, that's just, like taking it as like a really serious force to be listened to or to connect with, or to like, and you have to like really, if you ever take like a mediumship class, you have to really be willing to let go and take your imagination, like listen to it, and no matter what it says. And so like I use one example in the book of like a woman I knew, and because I didn't know that you could teach mediumship. I just thought like people were born as mediums and that was it. I didn't know. But even the best mediums take development classes where they like learn from each other and stuff. And so this woman, Susan Glazer, she was like the director of Lilydale for a long time. She was in a mediumship class, and she said, I saw this duck. And I said, no, I'm not giving this duck. And the duck wouldn't leave in my mind. And the duck kept coming back, and she's like, no, I'm not giving this duck. And then her teacher was like, Susan, what are you seeing? What are you seeing? And she's like, no. And she's like, give her the duck. And like, and then it turned out that this woman had a pet duck when she was little, and it was like super meaningful to her. And like, she grew up on a bowling alley, and it was her only friend, and like this whole saga. And she said, after that, I never questioned. I just gave it. And now, when I've sat with like really seasoned mediums, and I'll watch this one reading where the medium said, okay, there was this horse, and your mother has a brother, and the horse kicked her in the chest, and all, like, I'm seeing this and that. And the woman's like going, no, you're crazy. And because the person was my friend, I knew she went home and called her mom and found out it was all true.
Wow.
But she never told the medium. So I went back the next week and I said, Gretchen, oh my God, the woman who I brought for the reading, like, she went home and there was a horse and it did kick her mom, and her mom does have this brother. And she's like, oh, that's great. But like, I don't need to know that because like, I already knew that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, or, like she wasn't hung up on it, or like, cause I saw her too, when the woman was saying like, no, she just closed her eyes and like went, no, that's what I got for you. Like,
that's amazing.
But then, some readings, you get a reading and it makes no sense and it never does. Sometimes I've had a reading once where, this guy gave me this reading and I was like, no. And he was supposed to be this really good medium. And I was like, no, none of this is true. And then like 5 years later, all of it was true.
Wow. That's like,
that's
retrocausal. Yeah.
It like, yes, retrocausal. Like it was just like in the future, like he was seeing the future, and the future that I was like not like expecting or in tune with.
Wow. Yeah. Did you see that kind of? Yeah, I wanted to ask you about like the precognitive aspect of like mediumship. Is that something that you kind of came across much?
You mean like seeing the future, like if they can?
Yeah, like or that as like the target as opposed to communication with the dead.
Yeah, well, I think it's all part because if you're seeing the past, you can feel the future. Like I think it's all related. So like spiritualism has always been about like, yes, you're trying to read the past because you're trying to bring back the past in a way. You're trying to bring back dead people, but with that somehow comes the future as well. Like it's somehow connected. So it's not supposed to be like fortune telling in a way, but like all mediums do precog. Like it's just part of the part of what they get. I don't know.
Right. Like everything that's not now, I guess, maybe.
Right. Like what, and they always say like you spiritualists, or depending on the spiritualists, a lot of them dismiss pure psychic skills. Like they'll say, oh, well, you can be psychic, but if you're a medium, you're psychic and a medium. Like you can, not all psychics are medium, but all mediums are psychic. So it's like, and I've listened to people who are pretty seasoned talk about it with each other. And it's like, it seems to be like they describe the mechanism as like you raise your consciousness to a higher vibration than psychic, or, you know, and I don't know, they talk about it like, oh yeah, well, this mechanism that I'm using, if it's not working, I just envision like dials on a television and I say turn it up or make it sharper, or like let me see, like they learn to direct what they're getting, or they learn ways to sharpen or discern. And a lot of them have their own like symbol system, like I just saw the color green, so that means healing. And like everybody's could be different, almost like they have like a tarot card in their like deck in their head or something. Yeah.
Within spirit,
that's fascinating.
Yeah, definitely. Within spiritualism, is there like an acknowledgement of like an autonomous trickster presence ever, or there's not any kind of experiences with that, or?
Yeah, so it depends on the spiritualist, but like, so Kai Mugi, that medium that I mentioned earlier, who was from Germany, like he's a spiritualist medium, but he's more open to ideas than some spiritualists. And he's always saying, you know, spiritualism's only innovation is this belief that spirits need to prove themselves. And like, that's the only, like, everybody's always believed in spirits, like in every culture throughout time and every era and every country. But so he's like, and he goes, and the spiritualists believe the dead and only the dead inhabit the spirit world. He's like, hilarious, you know, because a lot of, you know, the other way to look at it is it's a daimonic realm, which means, you know, you have the fairies and you have like the aliens and you have like everything in there, and human and non-human. And that whole history is known as trickster stuff, you know. Like,
yeah.
Yeah, I think like the trickster is the archetype of this, and we can't understand. You know, that book, The Trickster and the Paranormal, by George Hansen, that was like a big influence. Although, like, you know, a lot of people like want to get beyond the causal thing, like. But I think that book, like, it just made perfect sense to me when I read it. When I found that book, I like drank it like water, like, because it made sense that, like, you know, it's a force that we cannot understand, and it's hard to even, like, it's hard for us to even compute it or how it works in the world. And so
it's cool that you mentioned that, because we've kind of been talking about George Hansen a bit, because he did an interview recently where there was a moment where he was talking about the hitchhiker effect of like bringing something home from a a paranormal experience. And it was definitely the high point of the interview, because there was not a lot was said, but there was this tension to it where he's definitely on the verge of some new research in that realm or something that I look forward to hearing about. Have you ever experienced anything like that, or?
Yeah. So I guess the answer would be, I don't know. I could have I was just watching that Unbinding documentary with did you guys watch it? I'm only halfway through.
Yeah.
When I photographed voodoo for 5 years, in Brooklyn, so yeah, George is very interested in this, the radiation, or, the hitchhiker thing, also too, UFOs, you'll hear these reports of implants, or the radiative thing. And I was just talking to one of my best friends is a medium. And this topic has been on my mind because of my new project. And I was saying, a lot of people don't, is it causal or not? I don't know. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. The hell if I know. I mean, George is very interested also too in the whole autoimmune disorder with mediums, or people who've been exposed. And my friend who's a medium was saying, a lot of us have autoimmune or thyroid or weight issues, or endocrine stuff, or in an autoimmune disorder, an autoimmune disorder is basically a confusion between self and other. Your body is attacking itself. That's literally what mediumship does. You're confusing self and other. You're doing that constantly with your brain. Whose thoughts am I thinking? You're conflating your senses, or you're messing with your senses in a way that could lend itself to confusion. That sounds like an autoimmune disorder. I asked my friend, I have a friend who has really bad rheumatoid arthritis, and I said, do you think it's from mediumship? And she said, well, it's like a chicken or the egg type thing. I think it's easier for them to get in if I'm weakened, but then it also makes it worse. So, I mean, if you talk to practitioners, they'll very much say that they have health stuff from it. And a lot of healers are really unhealthy people. A lot of the physical mediums are really overweight. They start craving sugar. I do think there's physical, or can be. A lot of those paranormal investigators talk about the hitchhiker thing, but this is too where it gets into ritual. Isn't that why you open and close a ritual, to keep that stuff out? So
yeah.
I don't. So it depends on the practitioner, but I think George was talking about skinwalkers at the Pentagon.
Yeah.
So that's that's all that Skinwalker Ranch stuff, right?
Yeah.
I don't know the data. He keeps telling me about that book, and that interview, I was noticing people were getting annoyed that he wasn't answering all the questions or something.
Yeah. I thought that made it that much more interesting that he was not ready to disclose, but also being a pro, maybe didn't want to jump into the deep end if he wasn't prepared or something. But yeah, that book's crazy. That whole story is wild, and obviously the place that it inhabits, literally being in the Pentagon and stuff like that, is insane, has insane implications too.
Right. But this is where I wonder about pattern recognition and stuff, because I know 100 other situations where there was nothing like that. I don't know. I mean, was the phenomena that strong? I don't know. I mean, I just saved an archive about a seance group. Actually, it was one of George Hansen's first things he ever studied. It's called Sorat. And I ended up, that'll probably be my next book, is this, I'm going to publish this archive of seance photography. So it's an archive. It's not my own photography, but I wrote a history of the group. And a lot of weird stuff did happen. Do I know if that's can I say why? They did get messages of the spirits warning them about radioactive type powers. And they also got like a lot of like whacked out, like hilarious, meaningless stuff too. So I don't know. And like also too, people die. We all die. So, there's that big thing about like, do magicians die poorly or not? And it's like, I don't know. I mean, people who don't do magic have shitty lives too. I don't know.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because I was going to ask you, like, how far does a pattern go, and what's the line that separates a pattern from real and delusion? But I think you kind of already are answering that.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, also too, I'm not doing statistics, and like also too, if you're doing statistics, like how big does your sample have to be?
Yeah.
Like, what are we talking? I don't even know how it seems to me a lot easier to get an idea in your head and then look for the pattern than it is to like actually discern a genuine pattern. I don't know. But also too, the crazy thing is, I think phenomena takes the shape of your mind. Like, so, spiritualists get different type of phenomena than people who are going out to look for UFOs than ghost hunters do. Like, I think there's it's always going to mirror like something about your sensory system that is perceiving it, because it's always an overlap of subjective and objective reality, because that's the only way like you can ever discern it. I don't know.
Yeah.
Like,
that's great.
I have a hard time going against thousands of years of taboo though. But that's just me. Like, I don't know. I mean, sometimes I'm like, am I too negative? I don't know. Spiritualists believe that like they don't work with the dark. They don't use the dark. Like, the dark is not part of their process. And I think just by declaring that, you somehow stop some of that, right? Like they insist they don't need protection because there's nothing to be like protected from, because they're not going into any of these dark avenues. They're like
but they believe they exist.
Yeah and like a lot of spiritualists though don't like stuff like people who do the rescue circles where you find the spirits who can't get back to the light and you're helping them. I know a lot of spiritualists are just like, I don't want to deal with that energy. Like, I'm not, she's a rescue circle person. Like, but so I do think some people are called to that work. Like, that's the thing. Like, people who have never been around such situations can think, it's all made up. But then you meet somebody who has an authentic practice, who lives in the world, like functions normally, and also has this thing going on, that they have this practice where they work this way. It's like hard to discount sometimes, even as whacked out as it sounds. I don't know.
When I was like younger, I would go to this like witch shop in town, and there was just like these two older women, heavy smokers, like these like they're characters, and they would give me once in a while like these readings. I would get like a tarot reading, or sometimes I'd walk in and they just like say like, like you have like such and such like attached to you. Happened once, which was very frightening, but so there's this like, but they seem to otherwise just like be like normal sort of people. It's so interesting. Yeah, people can sort of function on these several levels at once, like running a business kind of, and then like also making
there
these diagnoses almost.
There was a study at, I think it was Yale. Some mediums in Lilydale were part of it. They were using saliva to test something about how mediums are different from schizophrenics, because I don't know what they were doing with the saliva. I'm sorry, I don't understand enough about like the study, but basically because both hear voices in their heads, and like a medium will say, you learn to turn it off. You learn to say, get out of here. I'm not ready for, like, I don't need you right now. Get out. Or, and they can live a normal life, and it can actually add positivity and healing, or they can help people with this voice. And then schizophrenics, like, they'll be, doing self-harm, or can't have any peace, or can't function because of these voices. So how do we quantify that? Like, how do we, you can't put everybody who hears a voice in their head into the same box,
Sure.
And then Socrates had a voice in his head too,
right. Yeah. Sometimes and what if it's like a real voice then too? Like, I mean,
yeah.
Well, the difference between a hallucination and a channeling or something, like how can you possibly make a clean cut between those two?
I think that, like, the common way is just like, can you function in life or not? Like, or like, can you, like, can you take care of yourself? Can you live, but
yeah.
I don't know. I try hard to, I don't know. The more I learn, the more, like, I'm like, I don't know anything. Like, there's like, I'm actually very wary of the people who have it all figured out, and they're like,
of course,
it's like,
yeah, that's how I feel. That's why the immaterial doctrine stuff is so, it appeals to me, because like the world seems like a phenomenon, and it just takes all these different shapes, which is kind of crazy about the time that spiritualism comes into the world too, is like this world shift, and there's the Enlightenment, but then there's also like theosophy and the just strange things like the Gnostic texts, like reemerging after, a couple millennia is around the corner in the 20th century as well.
There's the communist, like 1848, it's like the Communist Manifesto, and like, oh God, I forget all the stuff that happened. But I'm also really hung up on like how, like, the Erie Canal was built right before all those religions exploded, and it's like that, like, connected the whole country to the rest of the world, and that, like, it's the first superhighway, and that's when capitalism exploded. Like, I mean, there's something about like ripping the land and putting the water in, and then like everything being connected, that like made this, like, these psyches shift. I'm kind of obsessed with that idea.
Yeah.
Wow, I hadn't thought of that at all. That's like releasing some sort of like earth power or something.
Yes. And also another thing I get tripped out about is a lot of, and this is just me like having a thought experiment. I'm not like saying it is or it isn't, but a lot of spiritualists were claiming to have Native American spirit guides. But like around that time, the Native Americans were actually doing the ghost dance, trying to raise all their dead. Like, they were literally doing those ghost dance ceremonies. Like, that was they were trying to raise the dead to help save them from the extinction. So it's like, it's kind of weird that, like, they were trying to do it, and then it's like appearing in the white culture. Like, I think there's like and it was kind of like a millennialist kind of like an end times cult, like the whole ghost dance thing became. And like, that's what a lot of the new American religions were too, that were popping up. So there's like this weird correspondence. Like,
that's fascinating.
It's like, ironically, when the great god Pan was proclaimed dead too, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh, and then there's Jocelyn Godwin wrote this great book about the burned over district. And I forget, there's like a theory, this something hand theory, where magicians were actually invoking all this stuff to happen. I forget the whole story, but it's like this theory of why all of this stuff popped up, and it was like an intentional ritual working that ended up like manifesting in that way. I don't know. I always say like it's not a cop out when I say like honestly, the more I learn, the less I know,
Mm.
because there's really, it just gets infinitely complicated, I think.
Yeah. That's what's so
Yeah.
fun about it, though. Like all these new corridors open up, right?
Yeah, yeah. And then it's like, okay, so why even bother with this? Or like, that's what I ask myself all the time. Like, why am I, you know, risking my reputation and like, yeah, like, why can't I just be a normal photographer? Why am I doing this? Like, what happened? But I do think that all of this stuff is really deeply tied to creativity and um, innovation and the forces that drive humanity forward. And it's also deeply tied to survival. So we're never going to cleanse it out. Like, I think maybe, some, what kind, like evangelical religion will say, you put this, you cleanse this out and you put it in a box and you keep it out. And it's like, but then you're not going to get any cheese.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Yeah.
Like it's like there's something. I think it's like I actually think the paranormal power is like really deeply tied to like sex, like the same kind of energy power, like that works in the world, like the procreative power. Not necessarily like, and I guess that's like a magic thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
absolutely,
yeah, they're obsessed with that. Yeah.
I mean, I know enough to know, like, I'm not that well versed in it, but it just seems to me like it's all part of like bringing forth the new, whether that is like, so it's like shares a bedrock or something.
Yeah. This is maybe a shift, but do you I was looking through the introduction or one of the introductions to your book, and there's a lot of discussion about spiritualist art. So the automatic writing, but also the automatic drawings, which is something I'm really interested in. Do you think of yourself as a spiritualist artist?
I mean, yeah, well, it's hard because like a lot of people will call me like, I guess I don't fit anywhere. And that's I guess it's part of my problem, but like, I guess it's like an okay problem because I mean, it's nice to like just be kind of doing your own thing, but I don't fit. Like, people have tried to put me in like the outsider art category, and like I went to art school, so like I don't really fit there. And like I actually feel like the spirituals, like I wish I could unlearn a lot of what I learned. Like, I mean, I feel like there is a lot to be said of like just going on impulse and but I'm also not having the experience that a spirit is actually guiding me. I mean, some of those artists really have the absolute experience of as if their hands are being lifted and used.
Yeah.
So some have spiritual inspiration, but some of those spirit artists are like being quite literal when they're talking about the process. But I think also too, there's something about automation. Like I did try to give over as much power to my camera as I possibly could. Meaning like I tried to like break all the rules and like, be just automate the process and let the process have like its glitches, or like let the process, like give the process as much leeway as possible.
Yeah.
So I try to work in that way. And I don't know what that is. Is that spirit? What is inspiration? I guess like that's what we're getting down to. But I never had the experience like a spirit was telling me what to do or directing me. No, but.
Right. Yeah. Because it seems to like walk this really interesting line of documentation, but also act like the actual thing that it's documenting comes through the documentation. Like,
yeah, I tried to do like, I guess there's like a lot of different types of pictures or a couple, like some of them are very, so straightforward, or just like recording like I guess a lot of exposition, right? Like just like trying to like record the history, and then like also these ones where I'm just trying to be really creative. And then there's the ones where I'm storytelling in a way that's like very journalistic or very traditional way you storytell with a camera. Yeah, like I don't know. That's why it took me so long to like do the book, because I worked on it for like 18 years, and I know that's like an absurd amount of time, but like for a long time I felt like that I would just never do anything with it, and it would never be complete. And then finally I figured out how to do it. But
yeah, the part at the back where you kind of narrativize it, I think, is really great, because though like the pictures are sort of narrative in their own way, it kind of adds this really interesting layer to and stuff that people wouldn't know.
Yeah, I'm really thankful to Robert Ansel from Fulgur, because he demanded that I write that. And, I look back and I read it and I like cringe, like, oh, I would have said this differently or that differently or whatever. But it really did. Now I consider myself a writer. Like I writing is part of my process now. And it was like, Robert's like, no, I need to know, like, I want to know what's going on in these pictures. And one of my favorite parts about that is I try as much as possible. I don't know how successful I am, but I try to bring in as much of the funny stuff that happened, like, or the absurdity, because you can't show that in the picture. But like, like sometimes I say like, oh, I'm just in it for the comedy, because like there is so much good comedy that comes out of these like hyper absurd situations. And so like, I mean, one day I would love to like write a paranormal comedy, or like, do like a paranormal memoir that's like funny. But like that. And I actually think the comedy is a good sign. Like it shows like the height. There's just like a brand of humor that comes with this stuff that like you can't get anywhere else. Like, I mean, when you see two older women like fight over like the spirit guide that showed up like on somebody's like sweater, like, and they're like, no, it's mine. No, that's my grandmother. She's wearing glasses. It's like, no.
That's awesome.
So
yeah, that's great.
That's what Ghostbusters gets right. Like Ghostbusters actually gets a lot right. But I think, seeing the absolute unique absurdist humor that can come with this stuff, like, it's like so spot on.
Yeah, that's great.
It's like a weirdly informed film. I think the building in Ghostbusters is supposed to be a reference to the Master Building. Have you heard that? Like Nicholas Roerich, who's kind of from that same era as well, early 20th century.
Yeah, no. So I know that because there's an architect that has spoken at my symposium, and I asked him to do like a history of spirit architecture, and he cited that there's like a big moment where he talks about that building. But Dan Aykroyd like fully knows the history. His whole family, like Ghostbusters is loosely based on his like great grandfather's like Séance diaries, and his father wrote this great book called The History of Ghosts. And like there's little jokes or little asides or little details in there that it's very much it's super well researched. Like it's very like for example, like when they're one of the opening scenes where Bill Murray is giving the ESP test and he's like messing with the guy's emotions, like they do that in ESP test, like they try to play with emotion to see if like it affects the ESP, like small things like that, like are very spot on. Like but he makes it funny too. So
yeah, I haven't seen that in forever. I need to rewatch that now with that in mind.
For sure.
I mean, that movie, like that, yeah. So you talk in the book, which also happens in Ghostbusters, of course, about like ectoplasm, and that's like a big part of that. What is that? What's ectoplasm?
So I get ectoplasm is a substance that is supposed to merge the realm between life and death, right? So it's like in spiritualism, it's a substance that it gets built from the medium's body and sometimes taken from the sitters in the room. And it's like, kind constructs and takes form, and then it comes to life. And it a lot, like a lot of times they'll see hands, or full materialization would be like the ultimate manifestation in ectoplasm. And it's like this idea, like a substance that's supposed to bridge the worlds. And when I started photographing in Lilydale, there were no like ectoplasm seances. Like that stuff was long gone, because spiritualism pretty much abandoned that, because a lot of people were faking them, like for tourists and things. And they just started doing, what you see on like the Long Island Medium, which is just, people having a conversation in a room with the lights on. And like, unless you're listening, if you turned off the sound, you wouldn't know anything was. It's not spooky at all, is what I'm saying. But all the mediums that I was meeting believed that it was a reality and it was a thing. And that, depending on the spiritualists, the photos are fake, but ectoplasm is real. Or like some of the spirit photos are real, some of them are fake, but ectoplasm is real. But like they believed in this possibility. So that kind of like drives the narrative of the book, that, I go around the world looking for ectoplasm and, finally like have that experience. But it took a really long time. It's hard to find ectoplasm.
I can imagine. I guess I definitely wanted to talk a little bit about some of the technical processes of creating these photos and stuff too. Did you shoot mostly on digital, or you use film as well? I mean, it's been, I'm sure, a mix of both over the course of 18 years.
Yeah, I started with film, and then I switched to digital the first half of the project, which is like probably like the first 2 chapters of the book, or it's all film. And then when I started back again after my 5-year break, I started digital. And, I actually like shooting digital, because you can, the digital file, you get like a more dynamic range. Like I can go into the shadows and into the highlights in ways that I can't with, a negative. There's more of a dynamic range, because you can only develop for highlights or develop for shadows if you're pushing or pulling your film. And also I can sit in a seat in a seance for 3 hours and not have to like reload film in the dark, or, like I'm not limited in that way. I also can peek, because a lot of these are like situations, like the lighting is just the biggest nightmare ever. So it's just technically more practical. Plus a lot of like the red and black pictures, when I was shooting that on film, there would be detail I could see on the negative with my eye, but I could never get printed in a color darkroom, because printing red light on photo paper, it's like it just prints red. You can't get any detail. So until I actually did digital scans of the film, I couldn't even make those pictures look the way that I, couldn't get all the information out of the negative. So, just because of the technical issues, I like digital better. But.
And I remember seeing this one photo where it's 2 mediums appear to be using like an old radio for some kind of experiment. Yeah. And I was wondering if a lot of your work occurred in tandem with other people documenting on different forms of media, and if there was ever any kind of events that synced up in the documentation or anything.
Oh, yeah. Well, early on when I first started, I would be the only one with a camera. So it was like it was a much bigger deal for me to be there early on than it is now, because now everybody has their cell phones and everybody's doing spirit photography in the seance, and everybody, and I do have some friends I have played around with, but I haven't done any like testing where like we'll all go to the same scene and take pictures and then compare. Like I've never had any like cross correspondence in that way. But I do have friends that like we all take gear out and like play around and see what happens. But I haven't done any like testing, like corresponding testing.
Yeah, I guess I was just curious if any like EVPs ever corresponded or anything like that. Maybe it would be super
Yeah,
interesting to have like that different range.
yeah. I'm trying to think. Like I have a friend Donna who's like an EVP person, and she's had stuff like that happen. But I don't know. Usually, I'm not. I haven't extensively done. That's kind of like an idea for. I'm hoping to do. I kind of have this idea that my next book will be the second book in like a trilogy. And so I kind of have like a sequel to Séance already outlined. And so in that there would be more like more stuff like that where I was like really trying to test the like take it as far as I could go, because I feel like I just kind of scratched the surface with it in the first book. So, but then it's like also like I don't know. I have this idea of like doing a psychic quest, like part of a psychic quest, but then I don't know how far I want to go with it. Like I have this idea, like try to take it as far as you can, but like do I really want to do it? I don't know. I mean, but there's still like a lot of, I'm really interested in saving the lost histories, and so I do know of, now that I've been working so hard, I do know a lot of visual history that has never been seen or that's out there that I'm trying to, like, there's a few things I'm really trying to save, hard to save. So that would be an element of it.
That's great.
Awesome.
I need to I did this book of art by a psychic artist. I also have to, I'll send you a copy of it. It's archiving this kind of stuff is important for sure.
Yeah, and everybody thinks it's garbage, and they're just tons of it is being thrown away. And like, for example, there was this like amazing, she was a transfiguration medium, and she was very famous in England, and she only was photographed once, and the pictures are amazing, but she thought, like, she was mad because she felt like the pictures were hers, and the photographer said, well, they're my pictures, and they had this fight. And then she never allowed herself to be photographed again. And I would like write her, like, can I please photograph you? And she'd be like, no, you can't. And then she died. And so there's only these pictures exist. And then supposedly her daughter threw out the archive.
Wow.
So I'm trying to find this photographer guy, and like I have his name, but I can't, like, I've got to like go, on this like trek to try to find him. But I do think they're really important pictures.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've been there, and it's impossible to track people down in that
I know, and like it's so easy for this just to get like, oh, this is junk, just throw it away. Like so much of it's already been lost. And like look at like the Hilma af Klint thing,
Yeah, right. I mean, must be like a multi-million-dollar kind of brand almost now. And
right, and like I mean, nobody saw that for like 80 years. Like
it's crazy.
And photography too, it's just now that photography's been accepted in the art world. It's done its dance with painting. It's been, it's been received. And so it's just now that people are willing to like look back and say, oh, like re-look at the history with the wider definition of what art photography is. And so that's just happening now. I mean, I think the American Folk Art Museum, they just declared a new genre, photo brute, like art brute, and it's like, how do you discern photo brute? Because like photography is naturally democratic, and there's a lot of vernacular, but like photo brute would be visionary photography, or photography that serves this other purpose that does not serve the art world or was never intended for an art world.
Right. In the like ephemera collection kind of culture, photography is like massive right now. Everyone's looking for old photos that have some sort of quality to them.
And also because I think photography is so much about time. so that the older they get, the more magic they have, or like the more power they have, or the, there's just something about like the longer you let something like age, it's almost like, again, like cheese or like wine or something like that.
Yeah. One of my favorite photos in here is the Loch Ness one. What was the story behind that?
Well, so that picture, I was on my honeymoon and we were in Scotland, and Loch Ness, have you ever been there?
No.
So there's actually a really, really great, interesting museum about the Loch Ness monster. And like, so that was in 2012 when I did that picture. So I had been working partially on that trip with I was doing something for the book, and we were doing like like people were doing like a lot of water experiments that I was photographing. And so then like on our part of our honeymoon, we were at this like we went to Loch Ness, and I was just looking at the water, and I was like thinking about like, oh, this dark water, and how many people have projected their thoughts onto this water trying to see this being. And I was just thinking about like energy, and like I think a lot about observation and like the mind like creating reality or like projecting onto reality. And so like I was thinking that, and I was like, I'm going to try to do this, like try to do an experiment to see if I can get a Loch Ness. And I did, but like, it's like a function of like, it's like, I think I was like, I just like ran towards it, and there was a boat in the lake, but it like, it worked.
That's so awesome.
Yeah, like a Loch Ness of light monster.
Yeah. So it's just kind of like, can I conjure Loch Ness? And I did, like with my, I tried, I intended, and I did. So that was the idea behind it, was kind of like, because I do think in all photography, like somehow your consciousness is embedded in it. Like that's like, what's the photographer's eye, because, and it because if it's a good photographer, they have like a style, and it's not about like the kind of film they use in the camera. It's the way that they use their eye,
Yeah, for sure. Do you have like a major influence in terms of photography?
Yeah, I mean, like my touchstone is Deanne Arbus. Like she's the reason I became a photographer. Really, like I saw her pictures and I realized like, oh, like I felt like her mind was somehow telling me something in this picture. And that's like the first time I ever thought of like a picture that way. Whereas like she was able to tell me something that was in her head without words, like using, like by projecting it onto reality, or like, I felt like it was very, like her work was very telepathic.
Yeah.
And, but I love all the like old, documentary, the street photography, like Lee Freelander is one of my like all-time favorites. Like there's a new book, one of the Coen brothers just edited a book of Lee Freelander pictures, and they're so trippy. They're completely psychedelic. Like it's such a great book. It's literally like he's transforming, he's just flattening 3D into 2D, but like, planes are coming out of cars, they're coming out of heads, they're coming out of like, it's really, really, really like a transformation of the world, like transformation of time and space. So I like a total photo geek. I love photography. But that, that's what, like my book, I really wish I could have been a photographer like Arbus, who like, she didn't need words, you just got her pictures. Although I always admired about her that she's so articulate when she did talk about her work, but you didn't need it to understand it. Like my work is like, I wish I could be a photographer who needed no words, but I guess I'm just not. But
well, yeah, I mean,
yeah,
you can look at the photos and but
I think the context is just so interesting that people want to peel it back even more, probably.
Yeah, like I felt like I was building on a history that, like, I felt like I was building on a visual history that nobody knew about. And so like I was already at XYZ and nobody knew ABC. And so I was
Right.
constantly trying to have to explain, well, there's this thing called spiritualism, and they do this thing called a seance, and there's this thing called this. And like, it just got so exhausting. So, yeah, so that's like, it needs the frame, I think. Like, I mean, but it can live as it is, but like, it's so much better with the frame, I think. Like the historical presence.
Right. Yeah, I mean the introductions are great. All the like archival stuff in there is
Yeah.
like the photo of the sisters is incredible. Like
Yeah. Like I just feel like it's so rich. Like, why not tell everybody about that? Like, it's like I like the lost visual history. And I was lucky because when I started this project, like I learned about like Hilma Clint, and I learned about spirit photography from the Spiritualists first, right? So I knew there was like this stuff. I knew there was a thing called spirit art, and I understood, like, but nobody was like interested. Like, it was nowhere. At that time, you would go to like the New Museum, and they'd have some art that I knew was spirit art, but it was totally cleansed of its context. It was presented as if it was abstract art, or nobody, like the Hilma af Klint, she was only in that one show in the 80s and had never been in a show again, like in 2001. Like, it was like nobody was looking at this, like, or interested at all. Like,
right. What that was like, was it like 10 years ago when she kind of like was revived?
yeah, I don't know what the impetus was. Like, the Guggenheim show, her retrospective in the Guggenheim opened in 2018.
Yeah.
And like, even then, what was wild is because she did have like a vision of like, these are paintings for the temple, and she envisioned this spiral temple, and like her retrospective was at the Guggenheim in this spiral. And so they didn't shy away from any of her. She also left a text, a religious, she was very clear, like, this was religious work. It was like, most of it, she had two different techniques, like, but for like the first part was, she said she was actually physically manhandled to make it. And then the second one was like through her mind inspiration painting. But even at the opening, I went to the opening conference, and one of the contributing artists got on stage and was like, I don't know why we have to like humor this like spirit bullshit.
Really?
Because she was like a mathematician, and she was a smart woman, and she was a good painter. So like, why do we even have to go there? And then her family was in the audience, and they came up and they were like, you have to go there because she left a text that said that's what it was. And then one of the art historians was like, well, you have to go there because I don't have the luxury of making up history. Like, you know, like, I'm a historian, and this is like what was left. So, even a lot of people who are fans of her work. And I think the person who was saying, why do we have to deal with the spirit stuff, is like one of the people who was involved in the very first exhibition that brought her back. So she was just going on the visuals. So I don't know. I mean, it's still
right. It's a weird full circle, though. Yeah, and with that, even that region of New York, like that's embedded in the fabric of New York. Is that era of spiritualism and esoterica and theosophy and Rourke. It's all there. It's really crazy.
I don't know. I mean, even now, it like, my work has all of this stuff has like this attraction repulsion thing. So people are either like repulsed by it or attracted by it, or both at the same time. So, it's for a lot of people, it's uncomfortable. Like, a lot of people like hate my work. Or like,
really?
or they're just like, oh, okay. Like, I mean, I just like recently had a meeting at a museum where the woman was like, oh,
yeah.
So, I mean, but I guess like, I guess that's good, right? Like, at least it's like a reaction. but I don't know. I
Sure,
mean,
yeah.
it's not for some people it's like too real, like
Mm.
a lot of these topics flourish in fiction and fantasy and where it can be like safely put in about like this is not real. And I'm like definitely trying to cross that and say, is it real? Are you sure it's not real? Like
Yeah.
What is the reality of it? But
yeah, what is real?
yeah.
Was there anything in the course of making this book, hanging out with all these people, was any of it ever like genuinely frightening?
Um so for the most part, this is why I stick to spiritualism, because I have tried a lot of other stuff. The vibe is very much, even if it like looks dramatically spooky, the vibe is very much grandmotherly, like healing, like
Yeah.
love vibe, like almost like a womb, like we're here to just like feel our loved ones or something, right? Even the weirder situations feel like that. But there's this one story I tell in the book where there's this medium I worked with quite a bit, and I love her. She's a really unique person. Her name is Sylvia Howarth, and she does like a lot of like the art stuff in the book. And she said, I was at her house and she was going to do a seance, and she said, well, I never sit in the dark. Like I never sit in the black dark. If I do, the next day something weird always happens in the kitchen. And I was like, oh, and she's like, but tonight I'm going to sit in the dark. And so she turned off all the lights and we were in the pitch dark. And as soon as she did, I heard, we heard sounds all the way like in the pipes in the house. And like I heard this drum play, and I don't know if somebody, it sounded like a drum was playing, and like, and then she did the seance, and like, she did some trance talking, and I don't know what much else happened. But then the next day I was in the kitchen and I went to go make myself a glass of, or like a cup of tea. And I touched her cupboard, which was like a ceramic knob, and it exploded in my hand and it cut my finger open, and it just went like, it just like as soon as I touched it, just like exploded, and like half of it shot up into the ceiling and then crashed. And I looked and I was like bleeding, and then her husband came over and is like, and I like was like, oh my God. And he's like, what just happened? And he like, oh my God. And like his hand got cut too. And we just looked at each other and like looking at our bloody hand and like, what just happened? And it was like a solid ceramic like knob. And I still have the scar. So I have like a scar from it. So like, I mean, but she, and I told, and she's like, yeah, something always weird always happens in the kitchen after I do that. I don't know what it is.
That's amazing.
Whoa.
It's a great scar to have, though.
But I mean, that was scary. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, it was like unexpected.
Yeah. I always find with like, of all those sort of paranormal things that have happened to me, most of them are sort of synchronicities.
Yeah.
And even if they're positive in the end, I always find the experience itself is frightening because of it feels like something's really happening. And that is almost like invigorating, but frightening. Do you know what I mean?
Yes. Yeah. And when they happen and then you start noticing them, I've had like a series where they just, the more you notice them and the more you go with it, the more intense they become. And then you just have to like turn it off. Like I had that with this new book that I've been doing. And it's like, it gets really spooky after a while. I think, like the synchronous, like the more you kind of like, it's like something you feed, or like something that like the more you let it in, the more it appears. And it's
like the egregore, right? Like the more I don't know, thought power that you're putting into it, the more it grows.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I had one, yeah, like series where I've had another one with this new book, and it's really unsettling. I don't know what to make of it. I mean, what do you do? I don't know.
Or
I
how do you know when it's over even?
yeah, yeah.
I guess you kind of know. Kind of
And
just
then
like,
when people are like, "Oh, it's just a synchronicity," it's like, "Yeah, well, is it? Like, what's that? Like, I don't know. I mean,
Yeah, it's
totally.
hard to explain them too. Like they can be so personally intense, and uh,
yeah,
What is the new thing you're working on? You said it was more of a sort of an archival project.
yeah. It's like a seance group from
Right.
Missouri, and they were together for 50 years, and um I was working with the sociologist who studied them, and I became friends with one of the last living members, and then I had like I acquired the whole archive, and then shortly before she died.
Hmm.
And so now I wrote a history of the group. So it's like my first, like the biggest thing I've ever written. I've never written in that way where I'm like telling like this. It's not that long. Um, but it's like a novella I wrote about them, and
Oh,
then I'm editing the pictures, and then it'll I think the format will kind of probably be like Séance, where I mean they have thousands and like thousands of pictures of like levitating tables and all kinds of wild stuff, and so it'll be like illustrated text and then just pictures and then hopefully an index at the end. Yeah.
yeah. So you said this was Sorat?
Yeah.
mm.
Yeah.
Sorrat.
It rings a bell. I have a book about them somewhere. Yeah.
Really? Yeah, I don't know. It might be the Jim McLennan book, The Entity Letters, or if you have the blue Sorat book, there's like a blue
Yeah.
book.
That's the
Oh,
one.
hang
Wow.
on to that. That's John. If it's the one I'm thinking of, it's John Thomas Richards' book. Um, it's hard to find now, but
Uh,
I have John Thomas Richards' archive.
Mm.
Let
Awesome.
me. Do you know what it's called?
It's called Sorat. If you Google John Thomas Richards Sorat,
Yeah.
it's hard to find now. I got like I think like a few $100 now.
Yeah. I don't. Yeah. I'll never find it during this interview. But
Uh, but you think
yeah,
you have it at the store?
maybe. Yeah. I'm not sure if it's that one. It is about Sorat and it is blue, but it's a paperback. Anyway.
It's a paperback.
Yeah.
Um,
And it's
is
called
it
like Psi
Sci
something.
Physics? Sci
Yeah.
Physics.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So that was Ghost written by John Thomas Richards,
Huh.
but it's by William Edward Cox, who was like the parapsychologist who studied the group. Yes, sci
Yeah.
physics.
That's the one. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's a
yeah,
bizarre book. I like that one.
yeah, yeah, yeah. That's getting rare too. Like I used to be able to
Yeah.
find that cheaper.
Yeah. I
Um,
love books. Um,
yeah.
Do you have any
Interesting.
like events or anything coming up?
Yes. So my book is traveling as like a solo exhibition, and it's going to open in Albany on Halloween, and it'll be in Albany at this women's college it'll be like at Opelka Gallery. It's on my website. It opens October 31st and it's up through December 4th or 9th, I think. And I'm going to do an event there on November 3rd and 4th.
Oh,
So,
nice.
yeah.
Oh,
So if anybody's near Albany.
yeah. I wonder if we have people. I think we have some listeners up that way, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I hope some people will check it out.
Yeah.
I wish I
Definitely.
could get up there.
Yeah. So it's like a probably half of the book. So it's like
Huh.
47 pictures and text, and yeah, like I get to do a talk with Anne Brody, who is like one of the first scholars who like re-looked at the women's rights movement and spiritualism. She wrote a book called Radical Spirits. It's a really good book.
Oh, yeah.
I get to
I've
do
read
that.
Gary Lockman's Politics and the Occult
Mm,
is where I've read anything about those connections, like that whole connection between the radical movements and spiritualism.
Yeah.
Nice. And that's going to be up for
let me go
about a month. It sounds like.
I know the gallery is called Opalka Gallery. Let me just
we're gonna have to make our exodus to Lilydale next summer.
End of July 25th through 27th. Russell Sage College in Albany, and the exhibition is up until December 9th.
Okay.
Awesome.
That's great. That's something I would love to see.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. So let's see. What do you think, Dave? Do you have any final questions?
No, I that was an amazing interview, though. Thank you so much for coming on. So much in there.
That was awesome.
Yeah, your work is really amazing, really important. So we're really excited to have talked to you about it.
Thank you. And then if anybody wants to know about Lilydale, I have a mailing list on my website where I don't do them. I just do my announcements out, and everything is like anything that I'm working on is at my site.
And that's just shannontaggart.com.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, we'll send people that way. Thanks again for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Awesome.
All right, have a good night.
All right,
you
thanks
too.
again.
All right, thanks.
Bye.
That was great.
Recording stopped.
Yeah, that was fun.
Yeah. Should we do a little afterword here for a couple minutes?
Yeah. Do you want me to keep recording?
No, I think we're probably fine on the Zoom here. But
cool.
Yeah, that's great. So really cool.
Interesting stuff.
I mean, I was so amazed that I kind of figured that we got to an hour.
On patreon.com/consensusunreality you will find bonus episodes, written content and much more. This recording contains an exclusive follow-up and bonus episode only on Patreon.